We built cities for ourselves, roads, buildings, subways, garbage systems, entire landscapes designed around one species, us. And for countless wild animals, that transformation was devastating. But some did something extraordinary. They stayed, they watched, and slowly, they learned how our world works. Some turned buildings into cliffs, some learned when we sleep, some figured out our garbage cans, and a few may have learned something even stranger, how to use our own behavior against us. Welcome back to Wild Unknown. Today we're meeting 8 animals that didn't just survive the human world. They learned how to use it. And by the time we reach the final animal, you may wonder whether humans were the only species that conquered the planet. Start with an animal so common, we barely see it anymore. The pigeon. Thousands gather beneath skyscrapers on bridges, rooftops, and train stations. To us, it's a city. But pigeons descended from rock-dwelling ancestors associated with cliffs and ledges. And look at a modern city from their perspective. Concrete walls rise vertically. Window ledges form nesting platforms. Bridges create shelter. Tall buildings resemble something strangely familiar. Cliffs. We didn't design cities for pigeons. But accidentally, we built structures they could use. And then we added something even better. Food, plazas, sidewalks, outdoor restaurants. Millions of humans dropping tiny opportunities every day. The pigeon didn't need to invent an entirely new way of living. It simply repurposed ours. That's the first rule of surviving humanity. You don't have to understand the machine, if the machine accidentally works for you. But some animals went much further. Because the next survivor doesn't just use what we leave behind, put a barrier between it and what it wants. And it may start trying to figure out how the barrier works. Raccoon. The problem solver to us. It's a trash can. To a raccoon, it's a puzzle with dinner inside, a lid, a latch, a fence, a garage, an attic. Human neighborhoods are filled with obstacles, but obstacles are only useful if the animal facing them gives up. Raccoons are remarkably dexterous and exploratory. Their sensitive front paws allow them to manipulate objects in ways few urban mammals can. And suddenly, our carefully designed world becomes something else. A playground of problems. We create containers. They investigate the openings. We block one route. They search for another. We secure the food. They keep exploring. That's why the raccoon is such a perfect urban survivor. It doesn't need to overpower our technology. It only needs to find the weakness we forgot. And every neighborhood offers thousands of chances to practice. But there's an important difference between solving our objects and solving us. Because somewhere else in the human world, another animal has learned that our routines may be more useful than our garbage. It doesn't need to break into the house. It only needs to know when we're no longer watching. Urban fox, the ghost between houses. You can live near an urban fox for years and barely know it's there. That's part of what makes it so successful. The fox doesn't need to dominate the city. It needs to move through the spaces we ignore. Gardens, railway edges, parks, empty lots, quiet streets, and especially the hours when human activity begins to disappear. In many human-dominated landscapes, foxes can shift their behavior around our presence. The city during the day belongs overwhelmingly to us, but after dark, the same streets become a different ecosystem. Traffic fades, doors close, food remains, and the fox emerges. That's a very different strategy from the raccoon. The raccoon solves the obstacle. The fox often avoids the confrontation altogether, and perhaps that's an even more elegant adaptation. Because sometimes surviving humans doesn't mean becoming fearless around us. It means learning precisely when not to meet us. But the next animal crossed another line. It didn't simply learn our schedule. In some places, it appears to have learned something about value, specifically, what humans are willing to pay to get something back. Macaque the negotiator. Imagine a monkey takes your sunglasses. You reach for them. It moves away. You offer food. And suddenly, the sunglasses come back. At certain tourist sites, long-tailed macaques have become famous for taking objects from visitors and exchanging them for food, glasses, phones, other belongings. But what makes the behavior fascinating isn't the theft. It's what happens next. Research on macaques at Bali's Uluwatu Temple has documented token robbing and bartering behavior, including sensitivity to the value humans place on different objects. Think about what that means. The animal doesn't need to understand money. It doesn't need to know what a smartphone does. It only needs to learn one relationship. You want this, and because you want it, the object has bargaining power. That's a remarkable step. The pigeon uses our architecture. The raccoon manipulates our obstacles. The fox adjusts to our schedule. But the macaque can exploit our response. Our behavior itself becomes part of the environment, and once an animal begins learning how humans react, the city becomes much more than buildings and food. It becomes predictable. But not every successful animal wants to negotiate with us. Some have perfected almost the opposite strategy. They can live astonishingly close to millions of people, while making sure most of those people never see them at all. Coyote. The animal you almost never see. There are cities where coyotes live among millions of people, yet ask most residents how often they've seen one. And the answer may be, never. That's not failure. That's the strategy. Coyotes are extraordinarily adaptable. They can use parks, drainage corridors, railway routes, green spaces, fragments of habitat squeezed between roads and buildings, and in human-dominated areas, avoiding us can become part of the survival equation. Move when human activity is lower, use cover, cross through spaces people rarely notice, disappear before morning. A coyote doesn't need the city to become wild again. It only needs enough invisible pathways connecting one opportunity to another. And that creates a strange reality. We can share the same neighborhood, the same park, even the same street, without sharing the same clock. Maybe the ultimate urban survivor isn't the animal that stops fearing humans. Maybe it's the animal that learns exactly how close it can live, without becoming a problem. But hiding isn't the only answer. Because some animals look at the landscape we've changed, the farms, the lawns, the garbage, and seem to arrive at a much simpler conclusion. Why hide from an opportunity? Wild boar, the opportunist. Wild boar don't need skyscrapers. They don't need complicated puzzles. Give them food, and they can work with the rest. Crops, lawns, gardens, garbage. Human activity can create concentrated sources of calories in places where wild food would normally be scattered and seasonal, and an adaptable omnivore notices. That's what makes wild boar such effective opportunists. They can eat an extraordinary variety of foods. They can exploit disturbed landscapes. And when human development meets boar habitat, the boundary can become very thin. To us, a cultivated field represents months of work. To a hungry boar, it's food concentrated conveniently in one place. A lawn is landscaping. A garbage area is waste. But animals don't care what we intended these things to be. They care what they can use. That's the recurring mistake humans make throughout this story. We create something for ourselves and assume we're the only species reading the opportunity. We're not. And few animals demonstrate that better than a creature many people consider little more than a noisy thief at the beach. Because gulls don't just notice food, they notice us. Gull the observer. You've probably seen the moment. Someone sits down with food, a gull appears, then another, and suddenly, you feel watched. There's a reason this relationship feels different. Gulls living around people don't simply encounter human food randomly. They can pay attention to human cues and behavior when deciding what might be worth investigating. To us, a person holding food is ordinary. To an opportunistic bird, it can be information. Where people gather, where meals happen, what gets dropped, when it's safe to approach. Observation costs almost nothing, but the reward can be enormous. And that reveals another rule of the human world. Sometimes the most valuable resource isn't food. It's information about where the food will appear next. The gull doesn't need to understand a restaurant. It only needs to recognize the patterns surrounding one. But compared with the final animal, even that relationship is recent. Because one creature didn't merely adapt to our cities. It followed agriculture, trade, ships, settlements, empires. Where civilization expanded, it expanded too. And its story may be the most uncomfortable one of all. Rat, the animal that followed civilization before cities. There were settlements. Before supermarkets, there were stores of grain. And wherever humans began concentrating food, we created an opportunity almost too good to ignore. Rats didn't need us to love them. They didn't need domestication. They didn't need an invitation. They needed three things civilization produces extraordinarily well: food, shelter, and transportation. Humans stored grain. Rats exploited it. We built dense settlements. They found places to hide. We connected distant lands through trade and ships. Some rats traveled with us. Then came modern cities, walls, basements, subways, sewers, restaurants, waste, warmth. An enormous artificial ecosystem, built entirely for humans, and yet remarkably useful to another species. That's why the rat is the perfect final animal in this story. The pigeon repurposed our structures. The raccoon solved our barriers. The fox learned our timing. The macaque learned our reactions. The coyote learned how to avoid us. The boar exploited our abundance. The gull watched our behavior. But rats did something bigger. They attached their success to the expansion of human civilization itself. We spread, and certain rats spread with us. So perhaps the strangest question isn't, how did rats invade our cities? It's this: did we build one of the greatest rat habitats on Earth? Without realizing it, we like to imagine cities as proof that humans conquered nature. But look closely, and nature is still here, on the rooftops, inside the parks, between the houses, under the streets, watching, learning, adapting. We changed the world faster than most animals could follow. Many couldn't. But these 8 found another answer. They learned how to live inside the change itself. And maybe that's what makes them extraordinary. Not because they defeated humans, but because they turned pieces of our world into pieces of theirs. Now I want to hear from you. Which animal surprised you the most? And which animal do you think has adapted to humans even better than these? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering the hidden stories unfolding around us every day, subscribe to Wild Unknown, because we built a world for ourselves, but we were never the only ones. Learning how to use it